But unfortunately, sometimes we end up chasing, religion. We end up chasing tradition. We end up chasing legalism more than we do relationship.
God is good this morning. Let's give him praise.
Of kicking off this series to begin this new year, this upward and outward, and both relationships so key. Both relationships so key, and we're going to continue on in that as we go throughout this day. There was a not too bright fellow who decided to become a counterfeiter. He hired an engraver of equal intelligence, and they proceeded to produce some counterfeit money. And by some mix-up, the money turned out to be $11 bills. Not wanting to waste the effort, the crook decided to head to an isolated small town where he figured he could cash the bogus bills. So he went into a small country store and he asked the clerk if he had a change for an $11 bill. Sure do, the clerk said. Would an 8 and a 3 be okay? Sometimes we're just not too bright. You think about this. This kind of crazy, funny story, but sometimes, even in our own lives, especially when we're talking about worldly decisions and fleshy decisions, it's just like, it's an $11 bill, nobody's going to know. I can pass this one off. They'll be okay with it, like, no big deal. And I'm not just, listen, this morning, I'm not this message this morning isn't just for people that haven't yet stepped into a relationship with Jesus. This is for Christians. Because Christians, come on. I mean, really, this is just kind of, we do pretty good, honestly, most of the time. But occasionally when it comes to worldly matters, it's just like, maybe, yeah, we can jump into the worldly because isn't that easy? Satisfying the flesh and satisfying those kind of desires, man, that's easy to do. But when it comes to the spiritual matters, when it comes to the things that affect our upward relationship or our relationship with God, with Christ, it's just sometimes we're just like, we fail miserably. In John chapter 18, one failure of a man that Jesus called to be his disciple, said, on this rock I will build my church. This man preached the very first message, about Christ after Jesus had went back to heaven and after the day of Pentecost, and 3,000 people were saved. But, if there was ever a Christian that you could put out there, this would be the dude. We think of him, it's Peter, the big old strong guy, and, Christian. But in John chapter 18, before Jesus died, it says this: meanwhile, Simon Peter was standing there warming himself. So they asked him, you aren't one of his disciples too, are you? And he denied it, saying, I'm not. And then one of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him. Didn't I see you with him in the garden? And again Peter denied it, and at that moment a rooster began to crow. We recall the fact that Peter denied Jesus. In this moment, kind of in the middle of this town, he was standing there by this fire. Some people, look back at it, and that's been called the devil's fire. That's not scriptural. It's not in the Bible. It doesn't say that. But if you look at the context of the story, and you look at the surroundings of the story, there have been some people that call that the devil's fire. And he was standing there warming himself. Man, sometimes we do the same thing. Sometimes we allow ourselves to get into that place, whether we want to admit it or not. We've all gotten to that place to where, in all honesty, we've denied Christ, just like Peter. Because Peter said, man, I won't ever deny you. And then that's what he'd said, just sometime before this. He said, I won't deny you. I'll die for you. I'll go wherever. I'll do whatever. I'll do, and then he's faced with it. And, it gets up and it gets tough. Life gets tough. And then boom, he, makes that mistake. And come on, Christian, and I'm, once again, Christians, I want to speak to you today. Don't just sit back and think that, well, this one's not for me. Because it is. Don't sometimes we get in those places of life, where we're all Jesus this and we're all Jesus that, and Jesus, I'll do anything and I'll serve anywhere and I'll give anything and I'll do all of this. But then and it's just like something happens in our lives, and whether it's the fleshy thing or whether it's this or whatever it is, and we kind of warm up to the devil's fire just a little bit, and we still love him. Peter still loved Jesus. It's not that he didn't love him. He followed him that whole time. He'd seen some amazing things. But still in that moment, we just struggled. We denied him one way or the other. May have been by committing a sin, or maybe it was by the sin of omission. Something that Jesus asked us to do, God's asked us to do, and we're like, no, I can't do that. Sometimes those for Christians, man, to me inside, man, I almost feel worse sometimes when I don't do what God asks me to do than when I do something that he doesn't want me to do. I've been struggling. I have wheels up in 11 days. I'm headed back to a country that I consider very near and dear to my heart. Some time ago, I had struggled with this decision because of some past things, but when I was asked to go, it was, of course, for a specific purpose. I'll tell you a little bit more about it as maybe next week, right before we go. But basically, we're going down, and this particular gentleman that pastors this church and leads this ministry, it's called Life Church International. No affiliation with the Life Church here in town. They're just called Life Church. His name is Pablo. His wife's name is Anna. And we made a connection with them years and years and years ago. Vernon was with me on a very, very first trip, and we went down and began to build a church. Or actually, they used it as a church, but it was a kind of an all-purpose building. And anyways, man, we made some life connections. Taylor and Stephen have both went with me. Taylor's been twice, and then my last trip was we flew in, and they took us up to Matagalpa, which is where we're going back to this time. But from there, we jumped in the back of an old big green army truck. There was 12 guys. You see these pictures, this army truck, it's got this back, and we pile in this thing, and we head up the mountains. Some of the most beautiful God-created country I've ever been. And we retraced the route of the very first Christian missionary that went through this. And we heard stories, and we went to these churches, and we preached, and we worshiped, and we sang, and we helped, and it was just amazing. We did a service one time in this little village, in this little bitty small, it was just a little bitty small building, and had wood, or had a roof on it, but there was woods, and you could see through the cracks. It was just really, very, very, meager building. And anyways, they were packed from the back to the front, side to side, just squeezed, just like this. And man, this service just kept on, and God was moving, and it was amazing. And this was one particular service. I've told this story before. We just kept worshiping, and I was playing an old guitar that they'd brought to us, and Corey Rush and myself, and we would play, and we played that day. It seemed like it was close to 3 hours straight. An old acoustic guitar that had literally telephone lines for strings. I looked down at one time, and I had blood dripping off the front of this guitar. And we just kept going, sweat, it was hot. And then all of a sudden, people started ripping the boards. You remember that, Vernon? They started ripping the walls off of this building so they could get closer. One of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. Well, anyways, opportunity to go back and help Pablo, and we're going in, and they've got a church plan, and they're in Matagalpa. They're moving into a building, and so we're going in and just completely setting this whole building up in 3 days. Really excited about it, but I was struggling with this decision. I knew what God had spoke to me. I talked with my wife, and had my wife's blessing, and went through and some different things, just going on. And just be honest with you, one of the biggest struggles that I've always had going is the financial part of it. Even though this is a relatively inexpensive trip, it still costs money. And so anyways, I'd kind of gotten to this place in my heart, and things were going on, and we've had these problems and struggles. And I told Lacey about a week ago, I said, I ain't going. I was ready to back out. She said, wait a minute. You said God told you to go. I said, yeah, I know. I hope he'll forgive me. She said, well, I'm sure he will, but if you're supposed to go. There was just, it was just almost like and this whole time I'm going through, and I don't care if it was money, I don't care if it was time, I don't care if it was things going on here. I could come up with all these different excuses of why, and it's just like, but God. And I knew, man, it was that very next day, and I think that was on a Saturday, and I came in here on a Sunday morning, and my wife was standing in the foyer, and I don't even remember exactly what had happened, but I walked up to my wife, and I smiled, and I kissed her, and I said, I got to go. And she just smiled. I said, I know. And God's been providing some different things, different ways. I've got 14 of the biggest trees laying down at the golf course that I've run a chainsaw more in the last week than I've ever run in my entire life. I'm like, God, could you have not found a better way to pay for me to go on this trip? When we don't do what God asks us to do, we'll live in almost the same guilt as stepping out and making a mistake. What's some of your greatest mess-ups? Oh, wait a minute, Pastor Ron, I don't want you to go there. Well, I wouldn't really want you to go there either in my life. Although I tell you some, and I've told you some before, but let's face it, I want you to think about it today. I stand up here this morning, all morning long, I've had stuff going in my mind, things that I've done, to myself, things that I've done against God, things that I've done to other people, these mess-ups, these failures. But you know what? Those become a part of our past, maybe a part of who we are, but in secret and before the Lord, we should always be able to go there and own up to our spiritual failures and our spiritual mistakes. We should never be so prideful that we can't stop for a moment and just look up at God and say, God, I'm sorry. Sometimes we make the mistake and we think, well, already made it, too late. No, it's not. Yes, we may have to live with the consequence or the action of doing that, but you know what? Stopping and just saying, God, I am sorry. And today we're focusing on the upward relationship or our relationship with God. This thing right here. And if you think about it, and that would be acceptable to think that the way to grow this relationship is to first allow ourselves to go higher and to work at going higher and to get closer to God. But I want to reverse that thinking this morning just a little bit, and because I got to thinking about this. If we truly want to grow our upward relationship with God, the way to do that is down. The way to do that is down. I'll show you. In James chapter 4, starting in verse 8, it says, come near to God and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve, mourn, and wail. Man, we should be passionate. When we make a mistake and when we commit a sin or when we mess up in the face of God, listen, asking for God and coming to God in that humble way, we should be passionate about that. Change your laughter to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord and he will lift you up. There is nothing joyful about sinning before God. There is nothing joyful about not following or being obedient to God. That there isn't. And I think sometimes we kind of pawn it off or play it off as like, well, it's no big deal. I still love God. Kind of like Peter in that temple court. It's, I've denied him, but I still love God. But you can tell by just reading the story that moment when that rooster crowed. Can you imagine what Peter felt inside? Can you imagine the guilt? Can you imagine the hurt? Can you imagine the shame? Just in that moment. 1 Peter 5, chapter 5 and 6 says, God opposes the proud but shows favor to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Humility. My wife will tell you, for years and years and years, I've always prayed for humility. God, keep me humble. It's kind of one of those things like praying for patience. What do you want me to pray for you? I need patience. No, you don't want me to pray that for you. Because when you pray for something, what's God going to do? Going to give you patience, or is he going to give you the ability to work? I mean, really. So if you pray for humility, God will humble you. And part of that humility, I mean, honestly, people to think about this because our pride gets in the way. That's not just a man thing when it comes to spiritual things. That's a man and a woman thing. We get to that place, and pride, you know what? Pride keeps us upright, and pride keeps a smile on our face, and pride keeps everything good. When people are coming in and saying, oh, how's it going? Oh, it's great. How's your relationship with God? Man, it's never been better. And all these things, you know what? We will stand up and we'll stand tall, with all that, that masquerade and that mask on, and everything's fine. But honestly, what God is saying, if you truly want to get closer to me, stop doing so much of this and start doing a little bit more of this. This, to me, when I'm broken, my mistakes, my sins, whatever, there's moments that I come in here and listen, I'm not a perfect person or a perfect pastor. But there's Sunday mornings when I'm going through things, or maybe during the week or whatever, and I just come in here in a dark room, and maybe I put music on and maybe I don't, and it's just, God. Sometimes laying in bed at night before I'm laying there trying to go to sleep, and just this stuff spinning inside of me, and there's just times, that just inside of myself and inside of my spirit, I've just got to say, God, man, my mind and all this stuff, it's just wrong, and I'm sorry. A man was stopped by a police officer who asked him why he was driving 66 miles per hour when the speed limit was 35. The man replied, but officer, I saw a sign that read 66. The officer patiently explained, mister, that's the route number, not the speed limit. Oh goodness, officer, the man exclaimed, it's a good thing you didn't see me on Route 109. We've all messed up. We've all made mistakes. We've all sinned and fallen short of God's glory. And honestly, sometimes I think we sometimes talk ourselves into the fact that it's okay. Kind of like Mike was talking about, that branch staying connected to that vine. You know what? Sometimes I think we do? Man, we're plugged in when everything's going good, and then something happens over here, and we're like, hold on, Jesus. We disconnect, and we go over here, and we come back, and then we walk back over, and we try to plug in and think everything, and it's like we try to keep our hands and all these different things, and then at the same time, we're wanting this relationship to grow upward, and we're wanting to grow with God, and it's just like we're not seeing the things happen that we want to see happen. We're not seeing, those levels, and, we're not, taking those steps, and sometimes we're just like, oh. And then you know what happens even then? Sometimes we even get comfortable with that. We're like, I guess this is just where I'm going to be. This is just where I'm going to fall. This is as close as I'm going to get. We want the best of both worlds, but let's get real. If we want our relationship to grow upwardly with God, we have got to be willing to humbly hit our knees. We have to. Going down to go up. Our verses for this entire series pretty much focuses on the greatest commandments. I've chosen those out of Matthew chapter 22, and I'll read them for you again just really quickly. This question was put to Jesus, and it's the teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law. Jesus replied, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. He said, this is the first and the greatest commandment. Okay? The first and the greatest commandment. And he said the second one's like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. The first and the greatest commandment. This is what we work on first. Right here. This is the very first thing right here. It is the greatest relationship that we'll ever have. The greatest decisions that we'll ever make. Why wouldn't we want to do whatever? Very simply, love God and love people. Get these right, most things else in our life fall into place. We get these wrong, most things in our life just go into disarray. Sometimes we're like this little 4-year-old girl. She was hugging a doll. She had 2 of them, one in each of her little arms. And she looked up at her mother and said, Mama, I love them, I love them, I love them. But they never love me back. Now, I know Jesus isn't a whiner. Do you think about that sometimes? I picture crazy things sometimes, and I'm just going to put this about, I'm going to say this about me, we can put all ourselves in this, but you ever think about Jesus just like, Lord, I died for them. I love them that much. I love them, I love them, I love them. But it's like they don't love me back. Really, honestly, he did say that contextually. You remember when he was walking, or actually headed back into Jerusalem, right before they were going to capture him and crucify him, and he stood on that mountain, he looked down on that city, and he wept. And basically what he said was, he said, I love them so much, they just don't get it. It's crazy. I'll turn 46 years old in March. And yes, I'm starting to feel old. Finally, I'm admitting it. I think my kids should do something special for me, don't you? I mean, I'm only 4 years from 50. I've provided well for them in my life. I've tried to work hard. They have a house to live in. They have clothes to wear, shoes to wear. Basically, when my two little twins there bat their little eyes at me, I suck up and give in. I've spent countless number of dollars. I think I deserve something, don't you? I think they should send me on a trip to the Smoky Mountains for about a week, put all their money together and make that happen. Don't you think that'd be good? Or maybe, how about a new truck? I've never, bought a new truck. I've always wanted, come on, men, you want that truck? I think they should buy me a new truck. Maybe me and your mama a new house. Wouldn't that be good? I mean, seriously, I think, and I'm looking at them smiling, and I can just sit here and say, no way, Dad. You might get a birthday card, but that'll be it. Won't be nothing in it, but you'll get a card. Don't you think our Father deserves far more than we give him? Don't you think that God deserves far more than what we give him? He deserves more love than we show him. Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. That sounds like a bunch to me. Before we talked about the word all, it sure is a big word for something that's so small, isn't it? If you think about it in this way, all, we say that word about, all the time. Just said it. All. Everything. Holding nothing back. Giving every last ounce. There was a writer one time that said this. One of the major struggles of religion at that time was legalism. The problem with legalism is that the focus is on following laws instead of imitating God. They'd taken the 10 Commandments and the first 5 books of the Bible and came up with over 600 rules and regulations that they determined had to be followed in order to please God. The thing that made it even more confusing, other than having over 600 laws to follow, was that the religious teachers couldn't even determine which of the laws were the most important to follow. Now think about that. Now, I'm not sitting here saying, listen, the Old Testament is the Old Testament. I believe in it. I love it. There's some great stuff. Still believe in the 10 Commandments with everything that's inside of me. What a guideline for us to follow. But I want you to look at this. It was almost confusing for the people in a way. I'm not contradicting God's word, so don't go there. But what happened is the people became more passionate and more intent and more, they just wanted to fulfill the law instead of fulfilling the relationship that God intended. As long as I do this right, and as long as I make this and do this, and it's apparent, and the reason I can say this is because of what happens in the Bible. It's apparent that wasn't enough for God. And how can I say that? Because he sent his son Jesus to this world to die and to break that veil and to give us the opportunity to get right here. Now, am I saying any of those, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, all that? No, absolutely. But Jesus came and he said, if you love my daddy with everything that you have, then it won't be no problem with all this other stuff. Jesus said, I didn't come to condemn the law, to fulfill the law, fulfill it. I didn't come to make it more confusing. I came to simplify it. Because if you'll love my dad and you'll love people in the same way, then all this other stuff just kind of follows suit and works its way in. But unfortunately, sometimes we end up chasing, religion. We end up chasing tradition. We end up chasing legalism more than we do relationship. We've fallen in this trap, and so many times in our churches today, we become solely concerned with keeping the rules and regulations. Our focus needs to be on God Himself. We should love the Bible, and you should love to read it, love to pour it into your life. But can I just say this? And you've heard me say something similar to this before. You should love the author more than the pages that it's written on. You can memorize it from cover to cover. But without a relationship, it's just knowledge. So how do we grow this upward relationship? A lot of the ways that Mike talked about in his video and his testimony. We humble ourselves before God. We confess our sins. We go down instead of up. And also by giving all. Everybody say all. All we have in every area of our life. Regular church attendance. Pastor Ron, is it really that important? Can I get to heaven without going to church? Yes, you can. But man, you miss some awesome stuff. You miss some awesome stuff. I got to celebrate the life of a very special lady this week. A second mom to me. A special family to our church. It was an honor. These flowers sit up here in remembrance and honor of Laureen today and the plants that are outside. We came together, yesterday, in the service. It was just amazing. One of the funnest services, and yes, I said fun. One of the funnest funeral services I've ever been a part of. And then people just came together and they loved on each other. And we sat in this building and I would sit back and watch as people would, man, thank you guys so much. People, you invested, you brought, you gave, you prayed, you served. It was just amazing. You miss that when you don't come. Teenagers miss connection. Middle schoolers miss connection. Kids miss learning about Jesus and that foundation. We miss something. We miss those points to where we're struggling and life just isn't well. And we've got that person that comes up and gives us a hug or slaps us on the back and says, it's good to see you. And just that feeling to know that somebody, cares. It matters. God says it matters. Serving. Really, serving. Sometimes, why would I add something else to my life? Because it matters. Jesus came to serve, not to be served. The example. Talk about giving all. Man, that's part of it, And I'm not saying 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're sitting in here in the church and you're doing this. That's not what I'm saying. But taking the step of faith, being obedient. And not saying, God, I can't do that. I can't afford that. I don't have time right now. My life is too hectic, God, to get on an airplane and fly thousands of miles away to invest in somebody else. But God says, I told you. I asked you to do that. Worshiping. Man, God created us to worship. Maybe you've been in our church services or maybe a church service somewhere else and maybe you see people raise their hands or, maybe weep or hit their knees or whatever. But, this, and I've said before, it's just a universal sign of surrender. Just saying, I give up. I give up. And maybe, for some people, man, that used to make me uncomfortable. Years and years and years ago, that was just an uncomfortable thing to me. It wasn't normal. I wasn't around that, and it was just uncomfortable. And then I had my first Pentecostal experience, and I ran. I'd be honest, I ran. I was like, what? And this isn't even a Pentecostal thing, by the way. Can I just say that? And I had to learn to figure that out. Some of you have heard me tell that story before where I just, man, and it's not about raising your hand, it's about raising your life. That's what it's about. It's about raising your life up and giving more of your life to God, humbling yourself. You know what? Because it's a little bit. And I remember, being in the church service one time, and I was really growing in God. I was seeking more of God, and I was begging God for more. I truly was. God, I need more of you. I want more of you. And then God would say, well, give me more of you. And this is just, whatever this. And I just remember just being there, and I had my hands, I was grabbing a hold. You heard of them white knuckle experiences? Well, I was. And all God was asking me to do was lift my hands in worship. That's it. I just was shaking. And I remember peeking. You guys know the peak, right? What are they doing? What's Wade doing? Oh, Wade's drumming, and he's got both hands up. How's he do that? I remember lifting that hand for the first time, and it was just a pinky. I'm serious. I am not lying. It was just like I could just feel that little pinky just coming up. And I just remember when I finally got him up, and God just said, thank you. It's not for show. It's just surrender. In fact, in 1 Timothy 2:8, it says, I want the men everywhere to pray, lifting up holy hands without anger or disputing. We need to realize that genuine worship is an expression of love to God. It's loving on Him and allowing Him to do the same. It is humbling ourselves before Him so this gets closer. This grows. Because when this grows, this has to grow. When we get this right, we'll get this right. Important thing is that the heart is bent towards God. In our prayer life, just communicating with God. In our study time, Mike talked about this, giving God more than just a moment. In our giving, sometimes it's sacrificial. It is. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you question. Sometimes you whatever. Next week, in a couple of weeks, when we go, we were blessed. Someone in our church that just had a passion for some things. Just and they bought us a brand new soundboard back here, and man, it's phenomenal. We're learning it, and it's just helped us so much. And back here in this room, sitting back here in this room is man, it's nice, and our old board, but it's been sitting back there, and this was kind of a God thing, I think, because the other night, and it's just kind of sit there, and we've talked about in the past what we're supposed to do with it. And somebody in our staff meeting, our leadership meeting the other night said, "Man, do we still have that?" And I was like, yeah, it's back there. What are we going to do with it? And I said, well, we've talked about different things. Well, why don't we give it away? If somebody that might need it. And we kind of discussed it a little bit, and we just kind of left it at that. And I didn't really think a whole lot about it. And then, the other day I had a meeting with Josh Hoppy about some things that we're going to be doing down in Nicaragua. And he gave me the list, because I'm kind of going down to help with, some simple things, and sound and so screen and stuff like that. And so he gave me the list of the things that were needed, and then he gave me the budget. And I'm like, you're what? Sound stuff's not cheap. Aaron would say amen. I'm like, how are we going to do this with this? And it was just that quick. God said, give it away. I said, God, I can't do that. He said, well, then talk to the men that can. So I sent him a text. And I said, this is what I want to do. I'm connected to these people. Our church is connected. Several of us have traveled. Wade's been down a couple times. Adam's been down. Kaylin's been down. We're going to continue to be connected. Pablo's next trip, I promise you he'll be in this church. But he's just going to have to deal with it. Guy said, do it. Yes, go for it. Absolutely. So we're making an investment. Now, is there a possibility we could use it again? Yeah. Possibility we might need it again? Yeah. But God said do it, so we're doing it. Sometimes giving is just about being obedient. It's not about the number. By the way, if any of you win that $1.3 billion this week, the tithe on that would be amazing. No joke. We're to love God with all our heart, all our soul, all our mind, anywhere, anytime. At church, at home, while driving, while working, while playing. We love Him by honoring Him as best as we can all the time. This matters. But how about we stop trying to climb to Him and just hit our knees and let Him